Hey everyone, I want to do a review of the concepts we've covered so far in this class. We've been out for like 4 weeks now, so I think everyone needs a bit of a refresher. So we spent the first few weeks of the class doing a deep dive into HTML. So we talked a good amount about the history of it, what an HTML tag is, an element, and then finally how to actually build out web pages using HTML. So after that, we had a discussion more geared towards design. So we talked about contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. We have our CREP principles that are driving all of the design decisions that we make. Excuse me. We talked about color theory and typography and how we can use it to make a cohesive design. And then we ended with about 2 weeks of just doing CSS. So when we left off for spring break, we were just getting our hands wet with position and layouts, and that's where I want to pick up today. So if we look at the box model again, where you consider that every element on a page is in a box. So the box is made up of the content surrounded by padding. You have a border and then a margin. So boxes can contain any number of other boxes, which lets us nest content. So you can have paragraphs under divs and EM tags and paragraphs. And styling the margins and the padding are the ways that we can create spaces on our web pages. So if you look at here, I have this section here of white space. I have this section here of white space, this gutter along here. And this is all done with changing padding and margin of the different blocks, the different boxes on my page. So that was our review. We're going to expand a little bit on this. So if you remember back, we talked about the differences between block and inline elements. And these two types of elements act differently in the box model. So if you think about a block element such as a div or a paragraph, the whole block acts as the containing box. So for an inline element, remember that these don't force any line breaks, so the box is inline and exists immediately around the content. So I'll do a little demo that explains this further. So I'm using this application called Dablet, which just lets you see in real time what I'm typing here. So say we have a div, then we have our ending tag, and then this is a div. So now you can see up here, this is showing up. You can put other stuff in here. So now I'm doing that nested element that I was talking about. This is a paragraph. Okay. And then maybe we have another div after this. Always being sure to end my elements so that I don't forget any. And I'm going to add one more element in here. We'll do a strong. So if I look up here, you can see all the content showing up. I'll zoom in a little bit. This paragraph is bold because by default the browser that I'm using reads this strong tag and makes it bold. Of course, this is editable in CSS, but this is how it goes by default. So when we want to imagine things as being in a box, a really good trick is to make all of them have their borders. So if we wanted to have, let's say, we do a border, I'm using the shortcut here, so you could do border width, border type, all that kind of stuff. So solid, we'll do 5 pixels, and then one of my favorite CSS colors, tomato. So now if you look up here, you can see both of these divs have this border around them, 5 pixels, solid, and there's no space between them, which means there's no margin. So if you remember, the margin goes around that box, and since we have the border right here, they're going to be touching. So let me put in some of these other ones. You can see more. So let's have this paragraph. We'll make this one dotted. And we'll still do 5 pixels. And we'll make this one gold. So now you can see this box here again. And these are both the divs and the paragraphs. They're both block elements. So they're going to try to take up that whole width of the space that it has available, the whole width of the container. And then the height, it's taking up as much height as it needs to display that content. but you can see this left border over here is touching this red one, so there's no padding between the left side of this paragraph, or no margin between the left side of this paragraph and the edge of that div. Okay, so, oh, I didn't know it did that. We'll do one more. We have our, forgot to use the strong tag in here. We'll do border, let's switch it up, do 3 pixels. What's good? What's a good one? Is there like a cactus one? Nope. Lime yellow? Lime? Okay, there, we'll leave it at that. So this is an inline. This is an inline div. It doesn't create that new page break. It doesn't take up the width of its container. The border goes immediately around the content. So you can see how those all play in together. And I will show you a little bit more about how these margins work. So you have these 2 divs here. Say I want to put some space in between here. So how do you do that? The space outside of the border is, remember, is the margin. So I can do margin bottom. We'll do this in pixels. 24 pixels. So you can see immediately it jumped down 24 pixels. So if these were 2 different unrelated groups of content, maybe this is all related and this is all related down here, this is a really good way of showing that space there. Remember, this is the proximity principle that we talked about. All right, so we have our divs away now. Let's actually do background. I think this is a color. Yeah. And then I'll make this a little bit thinner. Okay. So I can do the same thing with this padding, or this paragraph over here. So there's not too much of a point right now of me doing a margin because there aren't any other paragraphs to move it away from. But I could actually do it against the div. So if I did margin left, we'll do 12 pixels. All right, so you see how it moved over. This is a little hard to see. Let's do blue. There, that's better. So now this one moved away from this left-hand side. All right, so let's say I wanted to make this have a width of 300 pixels. All right, so this div is now 300 pixels. And because the elements that we have inside of it, they want to go to the full width, at least the block elements want to go to the full width of the container, you can see that they also got smaller. So you can see this one's touching over here. Let's remove this for the time being. Took up the full width of it. And then in the paragraph, say I wanted this to be width 50%. See, now it's going to take up half of the space that it has available. So let's go down to our strong tag for a second. Say I want this inline strong element to have a width of, we'll say 200 pixels. So if I do width 200 pixels, what do you think is going to happen? Did you see a change? There wasn't a change. That's because this is an inline element, this strong tag. It's supposed to be inside this paragraph. So when I try to give it a width or even a height, nothing. Let's do something crazy. Still nothing. If I were to do that here, you can see it automatically applied that height. So what makes that different? So like I said, inline element, the difference is you can't set a height or a width on an inline element. It's meant to be inside that paragraph. If you're changing the height and width of it, it's no longer really going to display inline in that way. So if you did want to do, if you did want the ability to change that, you have to change how it displays. So if it's, this is what it is by default, display inline. If I make this inline block, you can see now that it took effect. So when you're using an inline element like this, you don't really need to be changing this, because if you're using something like a strong, you normally want it to display inline like this. But that is a way that you can change it so you can set those height and width on it.